Hi, I'm Alejandria, a teen librarian at the Kenosha Public Library, and I'm going to show you how to weave using the Teens to Go kit. So this is basically what our weaving is going to look like. There's a good side and a bad side. You can use it as a coaster, like this, or you can just use it as a decoration because it's your weaving. You'll need to grab a couple of materials that came in the box that you got with the kit. One of them is a cardboard loom. It should look like this. It has these kind of cuts on the short sides. There should be 20 cuts on each side. And then there's these drawn horizontal lines that'll tell you where to do your weaving. The other side isn't very important, but it's important to know that the sides with the lines drawn on it are the front side. In addition to the cardboard loom, you'll have a yarn needle. It's plastic, so it's not very sharp on the end. It's pretty safe to use. You'll also have some yarn. There's a bigger yarn ball. You're going to use this to wrap around your cardboard first. And then you're going to have a bunch of other little pieces of yarn. So these little pieces you're going to use later in the weaving. So just make sure you know the difference between the really big ball of yarn and the small pieces. I also forgot to mention that there will be a plastic fork in your box. You will need to use this as well. That is included in the box. These next two items are not, so you'll need to find some tape. And you'll need to find a pair of scissors in your house to use. Okay, so first you're going to grab your cardboard loom and you're going to want the big ball of yarn and some tape. You can put the needle to the side. You won't need it right away. Find the tail of your ball of yarn and you're going to go ahead and put it through all the way to the left, the top notch. The top and bottom are both identical. Just choose one to be the top. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to choose this side. I'm going to stick the yarn in here. And you want to put the tail end down the back of the loom. Now you want it to hang about halfway down. Mine came out, so I'm just going to redo it. You want it to be about halfway down. Go ahead and take a piece of tape and tape that down. This is just going to keep it so it's secure and doesn't move around while you're trying to wrap it. Now that it's taped down and secure, go ahead and flip back to the front of your loom. And you're going to take your yarn and kind of just pull it so that it's not, it's not going to be overly tight, but it's going to be nice and tight. And put it in the first notch on the bottom. And so you're basically just going to flip this back over, going to the next notch and putting the yarn into the notch. So you can see it's not loose. You can either flip back and forth or just pull the yarn all the way around. But the important thing is that you want it going over the front and the back. We're going to speed up a little bit. Okay, so as we get to the end, I'm going to slow it down a little bit so that you can see what you do to secure the tail end. So I'm putting it through the last two notches, and I'm going to flip it to the back. The back is where you'll be taping these parts. So my string's a little bit longer, that's okay. Take a piece of tape. Go ahead and you might want to just pull these strings a little to the side so you don't get tape on them. And just tape that securely. Now I am going to trim this down a little bit because I don't want it to interfere when I'm doing my weaving so that it's not wrapping around to the front. Now that we have our vertical strands, it's time to put our horizontal strands onto our weaving. So you've got a whole bunch of different colored yarn. I'm going to choose to do a black and white striped one for my example that I'm going to make. You can just go ahead and pick one of the chunks of yarn. They're kind of wound a little loosely. You'll have a tail that should be coming off at the end of your yarn, and you're going to thread your needle. So go ahead and unwind it a little bit. And in order to thread my yarn needle, I like to take the end of my yarn and actually just drape it over the eye of my needle. And this way you're not putting the end of your yarn right through, because sometimes the strands get a little bit separated. This makes it a little bit easier to thread your needle. And you'll just do it like that. Leave a little bit of a tail on one side so that your needle is a little bit more secure on there. Okay, so now that we've got our needle threaded, it's time to start our weaving. So you're going to start close to the horizontal line. We have a way of making this a little bit better, so just go ahead and choose a spot very close there. I'm going to start on the right, going under the first strand and over the next strand. So you're just going to do this alternating over and under, over and under, over and under each strand, so that the strand that came before is different. You're going to have to probably push your needle through. Before you get to the end, just pull it like this so that you have enough looseness to get through going over and under the next one. So I went under, so we're going over, under, over, under. I am going to show you a slowed down, closer up version of this, so don't worry about that if you're missing this. Just watch for just a couple of minutes and you might kind of see how the process works. So this is our first strand. We have this kind of big chunk of yarn. It's not too unmanageable, but we actually are going to go ahead and pull this all the way through until we almost reach the end. So we're going to keep going. You're going to leave about a 3-inch tail at the end. So we're going to just keep pulling. And I have these squares that'll tell me when I've kind of reached 3 inches. This is a little longer, but it's fine. You're going to end up weaving this in. So actually the longer the better. So here we go. There's my first, this is my first row. Okay, so I remember I told you you also needed a fork. This will come in your box. There'll be a plastic fork. Of course, you can use whatever fork works for you. If you don't think plastic is sturdy enough, I've also got this nice bamboo one that I can personally use. You're just going to use it to basically do this movement. So anything that's kind of got teeth like a fork. So you can tell that my strand isn't quite at that horizontal line, and it might not be very straight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and use my fork to kind of pull the strands all the way down until it meets that line. So you're gonna actually be doing this for every single row that you do, so don't put that fork too far away. So we're working on the second row now. So here we go. Our last strand ended going over the vertical line, so we're actually gonna start going under, under, over, under. There we go. So you might start off doing this a little bit slowly, and that's totally fine, but it's actually very repetitive. So once you've been doing for a little bit, you might need something like some music to listen to, or a nice audiobook, or a show to watch. So it's kind of a good thing to do while you're doing something else, while you're listening to a podcast. Okay, so when we are getting towards the end of our second row, it's important to pull that all the way through. So we're actually just going to do the same thing we did before. Remember how we pulled it all the way to the end? I'm going to speed up. So here we go. You're not going to want to pull it. I'm going to pull it really tightly to show you what it looks like when you do this. It kind of bows in. You really don't want it to do that, but you also don't want it to be too loose. If you do bow it in, that's fine. Like, do what I'm doing and just start pulling it gently so that the yarn moves back just a little bit until it looks like how you want it to. So obviously that row is not right up against the first row, and we want to fix that, and that's what you're going to use your fork for. So start at the far end and just pull it down. And do this gently, especially in the first couple rows, because you don't want to actually push your first row past the horizontal line. So you kind of just want to do it gently but firmly so that it fills in all the gaps. Okay, so I want to show you a little more zoomed in and slower version of this. So you see that my yarn went over. So now I'm going to start this row going under. So under, over, under, over, under, over, under, over. And then when it gets hard to push it through, I'm just going to go ahead and pull my needle just enough so that I can pull it up and get that leverage to get over and under for the last second half of my my row. And just go ahead and gently pull that through. Be a little careful when you're pulling it like I did. I almost pulled my yarn all the way out of my eye of my needle, which isn't a huge thing. It's just kind of a pain to continuously have to thread your needle. So go ahead and pull that all the way through. You see my tail's getting a little bit mixed up over there. You don't want that to happen, so just anytime that happens, separate your tails. Okay, so at this point I've done several rows and I'm getting towards the end of my strand of yarn. So the way we kind of end our yarn is if we're about to run out of yarn and we have enough to do a 3-inch tail, we can do another row. So the way I do this, I'm just gonna kind of place it over and see, and it looks like I have enough to do at least another maybe 2 rows. So I'm gonna go ahead and do those quickly. This of course is sped up. I don't actually do this quickly. Okay, so I could tell that I wasn't going to be able to get another row out of my yarn. So I'm just going to go ahead and tighten those up. But I know that I'm not going to be able to get another row out of this piece of yarn and still have a 3-inch tail. We can tell that by like just kind of judging like this. So even though it's a little longer than 3 inches, just go ahead and take the yarn needle off and we're going to start on our next color. We've given you several colors to choose from, so you can kind of decide which patterns you'd like to go and do. Like I said before, I want to do kind of a black and white striped one. So I'm going to go ahead and use my next color is going to be one of my white chunks of yarn. Go ahead and find that tail and just thread your needle like we showed you how to earlier. And then it's time to start on your next row. So you're going to start just like you normally would. So my last piece of yarn went over the vertical strand. So I need to start this row by going under, over the next strand, under the next strand. So remember, just alternating over and under, over and under. You want it to be different than the row that came exactly before, because that's kind of how it holds on and makes a nice pattern. So when you're changing colors, remember how we started our first row, we left a 3-inch tail, and you wanted to leave a 3-inch tail when you ended your last color. And of course, you're going to start this row with another 3-inch tail. That is going to be so that you can weave in the ends, so it's kind of nice and sturdy. So if you leave a little bit more than 3 inches, that's fine, but just don't leave less than 3 inches. And then of course we're going to go ahead and use our fork and push that color right up against the previous color. You of course could decide to continue in black. You don't have to choose a different color if you want to do a larger stripe of black. You can. You're just going to use this method anytime you're running out of your current strand of yarn. Okay, so I just wanted to show you this really quickly. I started running out of yarn and had to end on the left side. Your tail isn't always going to be on the right side. It might end up on the left side. That's totally fine. The only thing to remember is then when you start your next strand of yarn, go ahead and start it on the same side that you ended on. Okay, now I'm almost at the end of my weaving, so you can see I'm almost at that other horizontal line that I was working up towards. That's kind of your note to finish. So here I'm gonna do this really quickly. So once I've gotten there, I'm gonna go ahead and I might end up with a lot more yarn. That's okay. We're just gonna go ahead and take our scissors and snip that, so that it's not a huge thing to work around. The important thing to note is not to go past the horizontal line. It's okay to go a little bit less than, that's fine. Go ahead and put your yarn needle somewhere to the side. You're still going to need it, but you don't need it right now. Okay, so now we've gotten to the part where we're going to be taking our weaving off the loom. You'll have these, your tails, you'll have some on the right, some on the left. You definitely will have some right at the beginning and the end of your weaving, so just be careful when you're taking this off the loom not to unweave that. So in order to do this, we're going to be going from right to left at the top, and you can go left to right, but just for consistency's sake, I'm just going to say we're going to go from the right to the left. Be careful of this top row here. You don't want that to unwind as you are tying. And that's why I'm going to show you how to do it in kind of a little bit of a slow way. Some places recommend that you cut everything and then tie everything at once, but I'm going to show you a way where we're cutting and weaving at the same time. So some places will recommend that you cut right here. I'm not going to do that because my fingers are a little bit bigger, so I'm going to show you that's like that much room that you have to knot. And I think that it would be easier if we cut at the back. So if we flip to the back, we're going to do these two, the first two strands, and we're going to go going from the right to the left, cutting 2 strands at a time. So I'm going to cut about like maybe 1/4 of the way down on the back. So cutting this one around here, cut, and this one as well, cut it to the same length. Take those 2 in your hand and just pull them to the front. You can you can tie in 2 different ways. You can cross the 2 strands and then put one of the ends through the circle that it makes. I find this is a little sloppy, so we're not going to do that. This is what I did on the example I showed you before. Instead, what I'm going to do is pull them together and make a circle of them together, and then put the 2 tails through the circle and tighten. This will end up being a lot less sloppy looking, so I recommend this way. Once you've got that nice and tight, it's time to move on to the next 2. So you're kind of just going to be doing that, tying every 2 together, going from the right to the left. I recommend cutting them only right before you're going to tie them, because then that way this row up here isn't going to get loose and unweave. So now we're just going to flip to the back, cut 2 more strands, carefully pull those to the front, and knot those 2 strands together. Knotting those 2 strands together is what is going to prevent that top part of your weaving from coming undone, and actually from allowing your whole weaving to come undone. But it's what's going to secure it. So you do want to make sure that you're getting those knots nice and tight. Okay, so I basically got almost all of them done. I'm going to show you, this is your last two. You've also got a stray tail here as well. So just be careful when you're doing that you don't get that mixed in. Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and knot these together. Again, being careful of that tail. And there you go. You have one entire, the top part has been cut and all tied together, and you're just going to repeat that with the other side. You're actually not going to have to cut this side though. So yeah, your tails are a little long. We're going to deal with that. The tails of your knots, but we're going to deal with that in just a little bit. So don't worry about that. I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you can see a little bit easier what I'm doing. So you see how loose this is? You can basically pull the entire thing right off. We're not going to do that because, like I said before, we were cutting it 2 at a time to keep it so that it wasn't unraveling. So these ones are cut, but they're still a little bit secure because they're in those notches. So all you have to do with this side is pull 2 out of the notches and knot them together. They've already been cut. You already flip to the back side and cut them basically part of the way through, so they're already loose. You don't have to worry about that. Take your time and knot these carefully. I'm going to speed up the video a little bit so that it goes a little quicker, but this is not the actual pace I knot at. It's a lot slower. Okay, we've come to our last 2 strands. Just take those off of the cardboard. You can actually just pull that to the side. It will be still taped on there, so you might have to cut it right there. I'm going to go ahead and knot these together. And once we do, it'll be nice and secure. You'll just have to weave in your ends. Those are the only things left to do in order to secure your weaving, but it's basically getting to the finishing point at this point. You can still reuse this for other projects. Just go ahead and take the tape off and put it to the side, or you can use this to make other kind of looms that you'd like. Okay, so now that I've kind of finished with that, I'm going to go ahead and take a look at my work. I've got a couple of tails that are coming off the end that I'm going to have to weave into my weaving. So I'm going to just push those to the side because I want to actually trim these ends that are coming off of my knots. I don't want them to be that long. I can cut those down pretty much as I would like. I'm going to do about 1 inch so that it has a little bit of a fringe on it. But remember, there's a knot there, so it doesn't matter if we cut it a little bit. But our ends do not have a knot at the end of them, so we are going to have to weave those in. So I'm going to show you what it's like. Choose a back side of your work. So you can look at both sides. One of them looks not as nice as the other. I'm going to decide that this will be the back. So I'm going to go ahead and weave in my ends by threading my yarn needle. And then I'm going to, weaving in your tail basically is just what it sounds like. You're actually just going to use your yarn needle to pick up a strand. So of course I can't see it on the front, so if my needle's poking all the way through to the other side, I've gone too far. You're just going to pick up one of the surface level strands. Of course, can't see it on the front, and just pull that through. So now you've kind of just pulled it through 1 stitch. I'm going to actually go ahead and do about 3. So I'm going to go through 1 more. and then one more after that. And then you can cut whatever remaining yarn is left coming loose. Okay, I'm going to show you what it looks like when I weave this tail in as well. So I'm going to go ahead and thread my needle again. So I should probably let you know that weaving your tails in is not an exact science. There's some people who do it very well because they've done it a lot, but I know it can be confusing when you first start. I like to pick a strand of yarn that's close to where my tail is coming out from, because otherwise you have this big strand of yarn that's not connected to anything that can be pulled out. So I'm going to go through a couple of stitches here because I have a nice setup. So I've got 4 stitches on my needle, and I can just go ahead and pull my yarn through those, and it's got 3 that are holding that tail nice and secure. Sometimes if I've got extra yarn on my yarn needle, I can go up as well in the opposite direction, and I like to do this because it's a little more secure. But I'm not going to bother weaving in this entire tail because I have enough to make it secure. So once I've got enough that I feel like I'm okay with, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take my scissors and give it a little cut. Okay, so at this point I've woven in all of my tails. I can kind of see where I've cut them, but they are woven into several other stitches, so they're secure. So you clearly have a good side and a not so good side because we decided to weave all of our tails into the same side. So when I use it as a coaster, I'm going to put the bad side against the table so that when I look at my coaster, I can just see the good side. So kind of just use it like that, or however you'd like to display your weaving. And I just want to also show you that this is my first weaving that I did, the one on the right. I decided to use a couple extra colors to see how they looked, and I knotted it in not such a nice way. So I would follow the instructions in this video for knotting rather than just knotting those together in an easier way.